Hello, and welcome to Federal Job Application Process, a series prepared for the Provost Career Center. My name is Joe Alkus. I'm a retired professor at Temple University and a former federal agent and supervisor. So I'm going to walk you through the federal job process to help you understand what you have to do to get a job in the federal sector. Finding a job in the federal sector is a challenge, but today's presentation will help you navigate through this process so you understand what you need to be prepared with in order to apply for jobs in the federal sector. The job process includes understanding job requirements, using the USA Jobs website to locate job announcements, understanding how your resume and application will be evaluated by the federal government, how you must modify your resume in order to capture some of the federal job keywords that are searchable on your resume, understanding and addressing the problems of knowledge, skill, and ability criteria, and finally, thinking about how students' backgrounds into competitive KSA statements work. So we'll take a look at all of those. The actual job process can be quite challenging. It starts with finding and locating the job vacancies that you want to apply for. When you go to make application, then your evaluation begins as part of the Office of Personnel Management's process. They look at your resume and see if you fit into the criteria that the employing agency wants you to have so you can proceed through the process. Sometimes there's an examination that you have to take, or a qualification episode, or even an interview. So when we get into this process, you'll have to be able to do all of those things. Once you are tentatively selected for a position, you have to undergo a rigorous background investigation, which includes a very in-depth investigation into your financial history, your academic credentials, and other things along with your employment. Once you're given a clearance as part of that background investigation, you will receive a training agreement. It's an agreement that says if you successfully complete the training for this position, you'll be hired. And the last part is getting that job. It is a cumbersome process and it can take many, many months. So let's get started. We want to talk about how you find positions on the USA Jobs website, USAJobs.gov. You can use a very powerful search engine within the USA Jobs and query jobs by the agency for which you might want to apply, the type of job, which in government we call job series, the location of the job or locality, and the general starting salary for that position. Usually, college graduates with a bachelor's degree obtain a position in the grade 5-7 range, 5-6-7 range. This is the front cover sheet of the USA Jobs website. It changes frequently because they're always trying to improve it, but we'll walk you through what you need to do to find the kinds of jobs you want. As you begin to search for jobs on the USA Jobs webpage, you have to be cognizant of a couple of things. The USA Jobs webpage is used for both civilian employees who have not become part of the government, what we like to call open to the public, and to existing federal employees who may have competitive status or accepted service status already in the government. So it's a dual purpose web page, but at the same time, you're going to use it just from the side of an incoming U.S. citizen. Virtually all the jobs in the federal government require that you are a U.S. citizen. Whether you're naturalized or born here in the United States, for the majority of those jobs, you must be a U.S. citizen. Most federal jobs are displayed by white-collar job series, although there are blue-collar jobs as well. The Office of Personnel Management classifies jobs in different categories: social science, human resource, law enforcement, technical sciences, all of these different kinds of job series. Many times that can be pretty cumbersome, but if you start to narrow your searches down by jobs, you'll be pretty successful in locating vacancies as they exist. Remember, when you identify a job vacancy, make sure it says it's opened to the public. The process is two-pronged. The first part of the process is an examination of your resume. That resume and what it contains is very important in that evaluation because it seeks to determine whether or not you have sufficient knowledge, skills, and abilities to succeed in that job. The second part is a specific delineation of qualifications, often called the Qualification Questionnaire, where it will ask you specific questions about the kinds of skills you possess and determine whether or not you have those at some level. You don't always have to hit the benchmark of those, but you have to have at least moderately good scores for entry-level positions. Together, the evaluation of your resume and the qualification questionnaire provides yourself with a qualification score. And oftentimes that's the email you'll receive from the Office of Personnel Management after they've evaluated your resume and qualification questionnaire. Let's talk a little bit about resumes for a second. Most of you at this point in time in your college careers have a resume, a standard bulletized type resume that helps you appear at a job site or go to a job fair or present during an interview. What we want you to work on for a federal job is a different kind of resume, a resume that's more text-based. USAJobs uses a simple system where it reads through a resume and determines certain keywords are being present or not. Those keywords are provided by the agency that's hiring. So we need to change your resume from that standard bulletized format to something that's more rich in text. Using this text-based resume will also help you down the road a piece if you're using other job sites like Monster, Indeed, and CareerBuilder. All of those sites, including USA Jobs, use an automated resume reader that reviews the text portion of your resume and searches for keywords. Your score for your resume is developed by how many keyword matches you have. Let's talk a little bit about your contact data. When you put your resume online, you need to show a couple of things. Your name. Now, this may sound a little bit funny, but sometimes people use different names at school or with friends than they do with a formal type of resume. You must include those other names that you're known by. Your permanent address and your local address. Now, most of you have an address for when you're at school, unless you're living at home. You should include both of those in your resume. Your phone number is very important because if there are questions about your resume, you may have to go and clarify things. So I recommend showing your cell phone on all of those. Work phone numbers can change and home numbers change, but your cell phone usually stays with you. On your email address, I would strongly recommend not to use the TU alpha letter number combination. It's difficult for employers to understand, and it's better that you have something with your name in it rather than this number and letter combination that can confuse an employer. You can go onto the Temple webpage and change your aliases on your Temple ID to include your name, or you could just get a Gmail or MSN or Yahoo account name. Make it as close to your name as possible. Avoid any of the kinds of funny names and emails that people might have, but they're not really a professional environment. Let's talk about your formal education in the resume. Most of you are graduating or soon to graduate from Temple with a major and possibly a minor. What you want to show is your overall cumulative grade point average, GPA, out of 4.0. You may also want to show your major GPA, and there's a methodology you can use to calculate that, or you can have your advisor help you with that as well. If you're not ready to graduate yet, but you're expecting to, give the date of your expected degree. Now, some employers will allow you to apply for a job that requires a bachelor's degree within 6 weeks of you obtaining that, while others want to ensure that you have your degree before you can apply. You need to read through the vacancy announcement to see what the employer desires. Also, you want to talk about if you have any other college level degrees or studies. Some of you might have an associate's degree that you obtained from a community college. Some of you may have outside certifications in different kinds of things, and they're all important to include on your resume. I usually recommend that students skip their high school diploma unless they had some very significant recognition, like a scholarship or very high grade point average, because it's assumed that while you're in college you have a high school diploma. I also recommend that you list extracurricular activities and honors, especially things that are volunteer work, leadership skills, or practical experience. These all go towards the scoring of your resume and how it will work. Some resumes and some people use and include their coursework when seeking a job, and I recommend doing that. But there's a couple of things you have to be careful with. Don't use jargon and the course names that an employer won't understand. Sometimes if you abbreviate something like you took a gen ed course, employers think you mean a GED. We have a program in the Criminal Justice Department called Inside Out Prison Exchange. Most people, if they're not familiar with that program, wouldn't know what it is. So it's better to explain the type of program that you are in rather than use those jargon course names. Think about that and ask someone or one of your friends who's not a Temple student if they knew what that name was and would they understand it. That'll give you a pretty good idea whether or not this is the way you should proceed. Let's talk a little bit about how you should handle your professional experience on your resume. If you have extensive job experience, you should list your jobs in reverse chronological order. That's the latest job first. Also, if you have limited experience, I recommend that you include things like volunteer work and certain activities. For instance, if you had an internship, or if you had a volunteer assignment, or you work in a civic organization, that kind of experience is just as good as a real job, a cash-paying job. If you've had a job while you're in school, say how many hours you work while attending college. For instance, if you're working 32 to 40 hours a week while attending college full-time, that's something you'd certainly want a prospective employer to know. As you begin to find job vacancies that you wish to apply for, you'll find some terms called knowledge, skills, and abilities. Sometimes they're called core questions, or they may be labeled how you will be evaluated. In these questions, they're going to ask you for some free-form input from you on things that the agency does that will be used as the criteria to evaluate you as part of the selection process. What kind of knowledge, skills, and abilities do you have that fit this criteria? Use all your background in this process. For instance, if one of the questions talks or asks about your ability to deal with people under adverse conditions, your experience may have that. For instance, if you've been a server at a restaurant and you're dealing with a crowded day and lots of backups in the kitchen, your ability to de-escalate and de-conflict that answer helps us evaluate the kind of potential you have. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. The typical KSA's, knowledge, skills, and abilities criteria, could include things like your ability to do a specialized work within the aspect of an agency's mission. For instance, if you're applying for a job as a criminal investigator, they may want to know if you've conducted criminal investigations. Now, most times we're not applying for jobs like that in the beginning of our career, but in fact, you might be eligible if you've worked in an area or you studied that kind of criteria in your classes. Oftentimes, you can substitute study and classroom experience for your KSAs. As an example, one of the criteria may be the ability to effectively communicate orally. Any kind of public speaking, sales, customer service, maybe you've run for a school office or a role in student government, all of those things could be used to evaluate your oral communication skills. Same thing with written communication skills, term papers, research papers, reports for work. The last one here listed is the ability to work in a diverse environment with individuals or groups. Such things as studying abroad, foreign language skills, cultural studies, volunteer work, all of those are applicable skills that you can use and have in your resume to demonstrate to an employer that you have the ability to work in a diverse environment. Many of you have taken internships during your career at Temple. This is very important for your overall evaluation, and you should treat that internship just as if it was a paying job. Make sure you list all of the skills and things that you did and that you acquired during that internship. It's very important to demonstrate to an agency that you are familiar with the kind of work that the agency does through your internship and that you're going to be able to do that when you're hired. You've got to really sell yourself in your resume. Talk about your job experiences. Talk about your internships. Talk about volunteer work or specialized study and courses that you might have taken, and even things like sports and other extracurricular activity. If you were in a fraternity or a sorority and you did fundraising or you had leadership skills, all of those things are part of your qualifications and very important to demonstrate in your resume. Let's talk about the occupational questionnaire for a moment. This is the second part of the system. The occupational questionnaire acts as a pointer system to your resume. The goal is to get as close to the benchmark answer as you can based on your own experience. And this includes academic coursework on your resume as a means to substitute for real-life work experience. Let me give you an example. Indicate the extent of which you have communicated orally with various levels of employees to obtain and provide information. That's a standard qualification questionnaire question. As you can see here, A, no experience, B, minor experience, C, you've communicated to some extent, D, presentations, and E, you've led briefings or taught. Now, not all of you are going to get to the point where you have that E benchmark answer, but you certainly should be close enough to D to include that if you've done oral presentations in a class or presented information or a paper at a seminar. Any of those kinds of things can be used for this criteria. We're going to move forward on to the next phase of the hiring process, an entrance exam. But first I want to talk to you in conclusion about your resume. It's very important to keep your resume as a living instrument. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when you're applying for different jobs, they may have different criteria, different KSAs. Your resume has to change with those types of things. So you want to be really careful not to have a one-size-fits-all resume. You know from life that one-size-fits-all clothing rarely fits well for anybody, and neither does a one-size-fits-all resume. So keep that resume fluid and change it frequently as you add experience to your life. My feeling is there's no such thing as bad experience. Even retail and things like that can be very valuable because they teach you those customer communication skills. Each agency has the ability to develop its own exam preparation and its own exam for entrance into the agency. Many of these exams have preparation guides or study guides online, and you need to do some querying to see those things. In law enforcement, from where I came from, most of those exams are logic, reasoning, and with or without some higher education skills like math and interpretation. Look around on the internet and find the exam preps that you can help with. You can also often buy prep manuals online as well and from Amazon. Once you're past that process, the next part is the interview, and probably one of the most frightening things for people to experience. Many agencies use different techniques to interview applicants. Some of them use a panel format, some of them do one-on-one interviews, some of them do a variety of both. You need to prepare yourself for the interview. I believe probably one of the most difficult questions you could ever obtain is the one, tell us about yourself. That's a frightening question. What I recommend is that you go through your resume and hit the highlights when you answer that question. I graduated from college with a degree. This was my GPA. Prior to coming, I've been working here, and hit the highlights of your career. Be ready for questions about the agency you're applying for. They may ask you something along the lines of, tell us what you think our agency does. Make sure you can answer that. Prep yourself with some background checking, looking at the agency's roles online. Most federal agencies have their own websites, and you can find out about the agency mission and the role of its employees from that. Be ready to explain your desire to work for an agency. Well, I saw the announcement and I decided I would apply for it. No, you have to be able to explain why you want to work for this agency. Oftentimes, there is going to be someone in the interview panel who's doing the job that you're applying for, and that's the one you need to impress. There's things called structured interviews. This is where there's a set of benchmarks for an entire set of interview questions. Hitting the benchmarks is often difficult for your first time in this process. Many of the questions may be probative of your background. Please be honest, because if you claim something on your resume and you cannot explain it when you're being interviewed, you're going to be a failure at the interview. If you claim you speak a language with fluency, you can pretty well guarantee your interview is going to be in that language. You also want to be able to demonstrate that you have judgment, integrity, how you deal with supervision, and how you deal with your coworkers. When you do that kind of interview, there's a lot of times you need to practice those kinds of questions. Tell us about something where you used your judgment. Tell us about a challenge to your integrity and how you dealt with that. Or they may ask you specific questions that look to see how you're going to answer those questions. I often recommend that when you are preparing for an interview, that you answer questions in your head, but out loud. So if I was to say to you in an interview, tell me about yourself, you need to practice that aloud. There's something really cool about the way our brains work, that when you start to practice aloud, maybe go take the dog for a walk or put the headphones in your smartphone and record your answer and then listen to it back. You'll do better if you do that repetitively and you hear your own answer. It's amazing how our minds can be more critical of us than we think. Some agencies now, and particularly in these tough times, do scenario-based interviews with video. They'll show you either an image on the screen and ask you to explain it, or they'll show you a scenario and ask you to explain your responses based on that. Oftentimes, the most difficult part of video-based interviews is there's no visual feedback. When you're interviewing face-to-face with someone, you can see their expression if they're nodding their head or if they're paying attention. With a video-based interview, you don't get that kind of visual feedback. But pretend you do. Pretend that they're looking at you and keep eye contact with the camera in the video. Once you're through this process, you may get, if you're lucky enough and fortunate enough, to get a tentative selection. You may be offered a position pending the successful outcome of reference checks, background investigations, police and credit checks, a training agreement that you successfully complete a training session, or even up to several weeks at a training academy, follow-up exercises, a physical and medical examination, and sometimes a polygraph as well. If you are required to fill out any forms for the government during this process, you can find those forms available to you at www.opm.gov/forms. Those forms are readily available in fillable PDFs that help you upload them as well. One of the things many agents are using now is the Electronic Questionnaire for Investigations, or EQIP. This is basically put the forms online and help you use them. The system is a little bit temperamental, and what I recommend, if you need to fill out one of those questionnaires online, that you make sure you have all your available information ahead of time. There's a form called the Standard Form 86, SF86, which is basically used in the EQIP system. You might want to download that form from the website and pencil in your answers so you don't have to stop in the middle of using the EQIP system to go search out those answers. A little preparation there will help you. Background investigations are extensive, and it's very important that you be able to provide them as much information to help speed your investigation through. Names and other names and aliases, contact data, the more you give, the better off it is. Your citizenship and naturalization statuses, the schools and your residences, education, employment, if you're a male over 18, whether you registered for the draft and when you did that. If you have a military history, you're going to have to provide copies of your DD-214s. Let me say a quick word about references. If you list references in the system, most probably the agents who are doing your background investigation are going to contact them. I recommend you use references who are readily available. You might want to be careful how you select a reference. For instance, if you're selecting someone from the Temple community and they're not real great about returning emails or phone calls, you may want to exclude those from your references. All these things that are listed on this slide are things that the background investigation is going to look into. You have to be honest here, because if you fail to be honest, you will be disqualified. Training agreements are basically for those agencies that have strict training requirements, including physical things and other kinds of things during the process. Upon successful completion of your training, you will move to the next step of your job. There's no flunking exams, there's no cheating, there's no misconduct while you're in training status. You have to master language proficiency if the job requires it. You may have additional testing as well. Once you get the job, and we hope you all do, you'll go through a probation period, usually 2 or 3 years from the beginning of the time you're hired. You'll be told where you're going to be assigned. Sometimes those decisions aren't made till after you complete your training. You'll be explained to your tour of duty, and you'll have the opportunity to start working for the agency. There's also many times a requirement that you stay with an agency for 2 or 3 years before you try to transfer to another agency. So you have to be careful to make sure that you understand those requirements. Lastly, not all agencies use the USA Jobs system. The FBI uses their own website, FBIJobs.gov. Some of the intelligence community uses their own sites as well, and there's also a catch-all called intelligencecareers.gov, which does hiring for some of the intelligence community agencies. Similar situations as USA Jobs, similar requirements, but different agencies because some agencies want to be able to control their own information. This concludes this presentation. Here's my contact data. I have a Twitter account where I post job vacancies in the criminal justice realm. I still have a Temple email account if you have questions, and I believe that the Provost Career Center is going to set up a Q&A situation for us where you can ask questions, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Goodbye and good luck.